All right, so what I thought I'd do today is we've got 45 minutes, so today is just really about a quick overview. Obviously, we have professional development sessions. We've got one coming up in Melbourne on the 19th of June. So if you wanted to look into it more, that would be a good day for you to attend if you're Melbourne-based. But what we'll look at today, we'll look at the books, have a quick look at those. We'll have a look at some resources, how we use them with kids, and I'll just take you through a quick PowerPoint to give you a summary. All right. If you have any questions, please stop and ask any questions as we go through. So I'm just going to share my screen out quickly and then we'll get going and I'll show you some resources and activities. All right, so hopefully you can see that. Yep. All right, so when we're talking about Numicon for special needs students, really importantly, Numicon is a multisensory approach. So we're really making sure that kids have the opportunity to see number concepts, feel them and touch them, and to develop that mathematical thinking through initially play and exploration, but then we make it more formal as we move through and get into questioning and conversations about it. So the focus initially is on developing the big ideas in number. So our resources that I'll show you today, excluding one which is FEM Foundations, are focusing on the big ideas. So we know for those kids with special needs particularly, we want to be making sure that they have those essential understandings first. So that's the focus of the resources that we'll look at today, and then obviously building up understanding as we move through. So we start off developing that early number sense and patterning through informal activities, as I said, through play, and then we're moving into those more formal activities and securing those big ideas. So you'll see that sort of focus on the big ideas as we go through. So what does it look like? A lot of practice with kids building, seeing concepts of area, looking at shape familiarization, counting, patterns, sorting things. But initially, we're really getting kids familiar with a range of resources that are reflecting those early number concepts, and I'll move through that. All right, so as I mentioned, Numicon is about a multisensory approach. It's about kids communicating mathematically. Now, if you've got kids that are nonverbal, obviously they're not going to have verbal communication, but they can be indicating their understandings through being active and illustrating their thinking through doing. And we have a range of different ideas as we move through schools around Australia. You know, we're at a school in Sydney a few weeks ago talking about kids that were non-verbal and only had really limited movement abilities. And one of the teachers was saying, which I thought was a great idea, and I need to buy some. At Kmart, you can buy buttons. You know how you get those yes, no buttons and you go click on it, goes yes, no, you know, those, I don't know if you've seen those. But they're like big buttons that are plastic and you click on them and they're different colors. And I think that they can be used for pets, which is funny. So pets can actually be indicating something. But she had the Numicon shapes, you know, printed out and laminated and put onto these buttons. So even for those kids who weren't able to necessarily pick up the Numicon shapes, they were able to maybe touch a button to indicate their understanding. So there's so many different ways that we can adapt these resources to support that multisensory approach. So Melissa just said that she uses those buttons at her school too. Yeah, it's such a good idea. So we want kids, as I said, if they're not able to verbalize their thinking, we want them to be active and illustrate their thinking by doing. For those kids that are verbal, we want them to start talking and developing that mathematical language. And really importantly, we want kids to start to see the patterns in maths. And kids are natural pattern seekers. So when kids can start to see patterns, they can start to generalize. And then we're really careful about exploring those relationships and seeing those connections. So we're making sure that if we're like looking at concepts, early number concepts, we're linking that back into, you know, daily eating routines, or we're linking that into play routines. So those relationships are explored all the time. All right, so Numicon is all about a concrete, representational, abstract approach. So making sure we start with the concrete before we build into the representational or pictorial approach, and definitely before we build into the abstract. So making sure that that concrete phase really is strong for our learners so that they can see these concepts in action before we move up into any other representation. All right, I'm going to show you the Numicon shapes. We'll have a look at what they look like and a few other activities, but essentially we've got a whole lot of different representations with the Numicon shapes and other resources that we're taking kids through. So they're starting to build up those number representations. All right, so I'm going to turn on my camera now, my document camera. Alrighty, and I'm going to grab out some Numicon shapes. So here's a box of Numicon shapes. Just pull it up a bit. All right, now these shapes come in individual boxes like this, and they all come in. Hi, Vanessa. Yep. Okay, thanks, Vanessa. They also come in bigger boxes as well. They're one of the resources of many resources that we have in Numicon. All right, so I'm just going to tip these out and pop them here on the table. Now, with the Numicon shapes, so I'm just raising that camera a little bit. Initially, as I move through all the activities today, really importantly, depending on students' ability, you may have students working with a set of 10 shapes, or you may have students initially just working with a set of 3 shapes, okay? And that's all they're working with to start off with, to develop that early number sense and differentiation between those 3. So we often have kids starting with 3 shapes, moving to 5 shapes, and then moving to the 10. And if you're following the ABLES curriculum, we sort of work through that in our PD from levels C and D, then up into foundation year 1 and year 2. So our special needs PD focuses on able C to year 2. Okay, so that's sort of where we're sitting. Depending on where your kids are at, that can be sort of talked about in the PD as well, because we'll have some schools that have kids working on a year 3 or 4 level. We can bring that in as well, but it's definitely where we're sitting and focusing on. All right, so first of all, really importantly, initially, what we're not doing is we're not talking about that as soon as we bring these out, we're not saying, okay, this is a 1, this is a 2, and this is a 3. The reason why we're not doing that, one of the biggest issues is, first of all, when we have symbols, a 1, 2, and a 3, there's actually nothing about a 1, 2, and a 3 that suggests that they're aligned to these particular shapes. Okay, so, you know, these symbols that we use are quite abstract, so we're not starting with them. What we really want to focus on initially is kids having a good understanding of proportion. So when I say proportion, it's recognizing that this one is bigger than this one, and this one is bigger than both of these, or these ones are smaller, or whatever. The focus on proportion is really important. We jump, and this is across all education settings, and I know even with, you know, working with kids at home, we jump into this concept of this is a 1, 2, 3, and here's the symbols for it before we do anything else. But really importantly, if kids don't understand proportion, it makes it really hard to move on to actually recognizing what the value is and how the values compare. Because when we're looking at maths, essentially maths is all about number relationships. If we're adding 2 things together, it's about seeing the relationship of 2 parts that make a whole. It is about those relationships that we're working on. So our first focus is on understanding proportion, seeing these concepts, seeing these as being more than, less than, or equal to. And we then move on to, as I said, bringing in more shapes into the picture, still doing some of that work, looking at more than, less than, and equal to. And we have feely bags, and I'm just trying to see, for some reason I haven't got my feely bag in front of me today, but we have cloth feely bags that Numicon shapes go into, where we're getting kids to feel for a particular shape. So for example, I might be putting 5 shapes in the bag, and I might say to students, can you find me a shape that is more than the green shape? Okay, so I might pull out another one. Can you find me a shape that's more than the green shape? Can you find me a shape that is less than the yellow shape? So I haven't even talked about it being 3 yet. It's just about the size and the comparison. So we do lots of that sort of work as we develop that early number understanding. The other thing that we're also doing at this stage, before we even introduce them, is we have our Numicon baseboard. This has a range of picture overlays. So you can see as I flip that over, there's a whole lot of different overlays. And there's also number overlays. I might not have one with me. There's number overlays as well. So when we're looking at all the different ways you can make 4, they'll make 4 with 2 2 shapes and a 3 and a 1 and 4 1s, etc. So initially this stage, what we're doing is we're just looking at matching. So we're just looking at which shapes match the size of the shapes that are on the cat, for example. So I can see here that I can put all of my 2s. I can be matching these to make the cat. Okay, so that's the initial concept, is things like matching, differentiating between color, size, and shape. Okay, once kids have become familiar with the Numicon shapes, we then work on, and there's a range of different activities. We then work on that one-to-one correspondence. So I'll just show you some activities we do for that, where we're focusing on one peg for every shape. So I'm just going to grab out, as I just get my pegs all over the floor. Okay, so we then move on to, for example, I have a 5 shape here. In my 5 shape, I can put 5 pegs. 1, 2. Now, at this stage, I don't actually have to be counting it, okay? But what I am doing is developing that early correspondence of one peg to one position, okay? When we're getting to counting, obviously I would be counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I can see there's 5, and I can put another one on the top to prove that that actually makes 5. All right, so we're working on that early number understanding. We also do a lot with, as we're developing that, with Play-Doh, and Play-Doh is a beautiful resource for using these with these Numicon shapes. So I'm going to grab this out. All right, so I'm just going to grab my Play-Doh out. And for example, if we're focusing on the number 3, I can put my 3 shape in here and let's press it down. And you'll see when I take it out, we've got that imprint in the Play-Doh, okay? And then once again, I can be putting pegs on or pebbles or whatever I'm working on with, and I can put 3 pegs on, okay? I could put my 3 shape on to show that that makes 3, all right? And then I can also take those off, and then the focus, once again, I can press those out. So 1, 2, 3. So really supports that very tactile approach to early counting and one-to-one correspondence. Alrighty, once kids have become familiar with the Numicon shapes and they are starting to look at the value, we then organize the shapes from smallest to largest. So I'll just quickly show you how we do that. So we start with our one on the left, and that supports the way that we would see our Numicon shapes with matched to a number line where we're starting from the left. And as you can see, as I build these up, I'm showing that each shape is getting larger. It's bigger than the one before. So once again, before I need to say that this is a 1 and this is a 10, I'm looking at the relationship of those shapes to each other. So I can very clearly see over here, I've got the small shape, and each one is 1 bigger than the one before. I can see they're all different shapes. Once again, I could be using the whole set from 1 to 10, or I could just be using a set from 1 to 5. We also have a number line, which has also jumped out of my bag, that shows the Numicon shapes with the words on there as well. And I'll find where that one's gone. And that's also a handy one to pop out when we're doing these activities. But we start looking at ordering the shapes from smallest to largest, and lots of different games that we play where we're looking at securing that understanding of the position of those shapes. And as I said, we do have a number line that represents that I have mislaid at the moment. All right, so when we have our Numicon shapes laid out from 1 to 10, we then start to talk about the size, once again, which ones are bigger and smaller. And I would be playing lots of games. Find me a shape that is smaller than the red shape, and kids would find me a shape that's smaller than the red shape. But the idea here is to practice ordering them from 1 to 10 and seeing that relationship of them growing and looking at the pattern of them getting bigger. We then have a whole lot of different games we play, like swaps, where we swap 2 shapes in the set, and then kids close their eyes, we swap 2 shapes, and then they need to open up their eyes and find the missing shape. Excuse me. So these sort of activities really support us then in getting the kids secure in seeing that that set of numbers from 1 to 10. All right. So a range of different activities and games we do. Essentially, we want kids to see these numbers as whole numbers. So we're working from that 1 to 1 to the whole number. So while we're focusing on initially, for example, having 3 pegs or 3 beads or whatever you want to put in the middle, or 3 Smarties, we're working on that concept of 1, 2, 3, that one-to-one correspondence. But our aim is to get to the stage that we actually see that 3 as a whole number of 3. So we no longer have to count 1, 2, 3. We've done so many activities, we know that's a 3. So that then when we move on to, for example, part whole concepts of 4 plus 3, We're no longer having to count 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4 and trusting that count and moving on. We can see those as two parts that make a whole number of 7. Okay, so that's the aim of where we're moving to, is that whole number representation. But we do that by a lot of building up that one-to-one correspondence using a range of different activities that do that. All right, I'm going to jump back to the presentation and I'll jump back to that in a sec. All righty. So as you can see there with those Numicon shapes, we talk a lot about the patterns. As I said, we talk a lot about the size of them. And if I was to actually stack them, you know, with the 10 down the bottom and then stack them up, we can very clearly see, even before we know the pink is a 7 or the aqua is a 6, we're seeing that size difference as I do a pile there. So if you can see on my screen, that relationship of each one being one more than the one before. The properties of odd and even also really jump out with Numicon shapes. So if you've got students working at that level, you'll find that relationship of odd and even will be really easy to identify. Okay, so when we're looking at the feely bag, the really big focus is on putting hands into the bag, feeling for the shapes in the bag, feeling for the differences and the relationship between those. We then have a range of activities such as this one. My students are painting and printing, stamping, all those activities. Numicon in the sand. So these are beautiful activities when kids are starting to become familiar with the Numicon resources, because, for example, you can do a treasure hunt where or, you know, an archaeological dig where you can put a whole lot of shapes in and they're finding and matching those shapes. We then start looking at building up that relationship of the numerals and what that looks like and becoming more formal with that learning. So we've had a look at a couple of these. These are just a few pictures as we move along of those early number concepts. But really importantly at this stage, it is about shape familiarization. It's about differentiating between the shapes and that concept of size, more than, less than, and equal to. When we're using the Numicon shapes in the feely bag, these are great for activities such as bigger than, smaller than, matching the nominated shape, and matching the shape to the picture overlays, the baseboard overlays that I showed you as well. So they're really starting to develop that familiarization with the different shapes and the different sizes of those Numicon shapes. I've shown you the Numicon Play-Doh, lots of lovely things that we do with Play-Doh. And the lovely thing about Play-Doh, it's a really good regulation tool as well. So kids can be moving and modeling with that Play-Doh. It's really good for regulation as well. I'll just quickly run you through Numicon resources, and then I'll introduce you to the teacher books that we'll be looking at, and then we'll do a few more activities. So the Numicon shapes, as I showed you, they come in the individual boxes of 1 to 10 and then the bigger boxes as well. We've got the baseboards that I've shown you with a range of overlays, and these baseboards are great with the overlays if we're doing sort of counting. So say, for example, if you can see just stop that share for a minute. If you can see here, I might have a range of pegs here on the board. And I obviously can't sabotage that collection because there's too many of them. So what I can be doing then is putting a 10 shape on the board, my 10 shape on the board, and then I can be putting pegs in. And I'm starting at the bottom. We start at the bottom to build up and we subtract from the top. And if I have a look here, I can see that I've got less than 10 pegs. And if I'm looking at the Numicon shape that matches that, I think it's a 9, I can pop that on and I can see that that is in fact a 9. So we do a lot of that sort of one-to-one building up into that whole number where we're using the pegboards. The pegboards are also handy. So these are actually wobbling at the moment as I've got them on the board, which allows us to put the shapes over the top. But we can also have them fixed, so I can turn them over and they will become quite rigid and fixed on the board. So this is great if your kids are moving things around, or if you're doing anything like graphing. And we've got strips that we put on the board. So say, for example, if we were graphing, you know, how many kids are in yellow team, green team, red team, we can put strips of color strips on there and then numbers 1 to 10 up here. Or we might be graphing how kids, what transport kids take to come to school. So we've got strips that have little transport icons or fruit and vegetable icons or sport icons, and we can be doing things like graphing. So we can see that really strong visual representation of those concepts of number. Once again, we're comparing through proportion and looking at those relationships as well. So we do a lot with this board. Then later down the track, we use it for concepts like arrays for multiplication. So we do a lot with that with our older kids. And then we have another board that's similar that we use for our senior kids for fractions, decimals, and percentages that are sort of related to that as well. It's an orange board that represents sort of the orange one shape. All right. Let's keep going. Other resources that we have are a range of number lines. So we've got lots of different number lines, and these vary depending on what levels kids are at. So for example, if you can see up here on the screen, we've got a tens number line. So this is really great as we're building up numbers. So for example, if I'm showing the number 16, I can see 16 as being 1, 10, and 6 more, and I might be doing addition of 16 plus 5. I can see it goes past my 20 line and it's 20 and 1 more. So we can be using our tens number line that goes all the way to 100, even for counting by tens to 100. So we can get, imagine you can see the rest of that. You get like 10, 20, 30, 40. You can counting up by tens and back by tens. We also have a 0 to 100 number line. So this is another one, if you're able to see this. And this one we use with our Cuisenaire rods, which I'll show you quickly in a minute. And then there's a range of different number lines. There's a 0 to 31 number line, lots of different ones. So I just mentioned our Cuisenaire rods. I'll just show you those. We do a little bit of this in our PD, but we don't focus a whole lot on the Cuisenaire rods, mostly because depending on the kids that you're working with, they could be a swallowing hazard. So depending on often your age, you may or may not be familiar with Cuisenaire rods. So these are Cuisenaire rods. I'll just grab out a set. And Cuisenaire rods have been used since the 1940s. They're similar to what we would see in a so it's in the wrong order, in an MAB base 10 sort of set. However, you can see here I've got them organized from smallest to largest. Okay, I'll stop that share for a minute. So here they are organized from smallest to largest. But unlike an MAB 10 strip, so if I grab an MAB 10 strip, you can see they're all marked. Okay, the Cuisenaire rods are not marked. Okay, so the lovely thing about Cuisenaire rods is, in this example, this orange could have the value of 10, and the one could have the cube could have the value of 1. But if I'm looking at fractions, and once again, I'm looking at proportion of these two parts being equal, and then, or the same, and then when I put them with this, they are equivalent to that orange. So I can start to look at those concepts of a half. So we use these a lot when we're looking at fractions, part, whole, those sort of concepts as well as we move up the school. But initially we're looking at the relationships again of these, each one being 1 more. So these are a lovely resource, and you'll find these across the Numicon teacher handbooks, but just just noting, if you've got kids that are mouthing resources, you would be very conscious of not having these little ones there, because you could definitely swallow one of those. So they're the Cuisenaire rods. And we also have tracks that those Cuisenaire rods go into. I'll just quickly show you what they look like. So this is a rod track. I've only got it to 30, but it goes all the way to 100. So if I was to put my 10 rod in and then my 5, I can see that that goes up to the 15. So if I'm looking at early addition concepts, I might have 15 and 3 more makes 18. Okay, and I can see it coming up to that 18 point. Or with our older kids, when we're looking at multiplication, division, factors and multiples, we use these a lot as well. So that's our Cuisenaire rods and number tracks, and they also go on the other number line, the 100 number line as well. All right. We then have spinners and overlays. So these are the spinners. You can see here. So we use these a lot for different games, and they have different overlays. So these will come off. You can see there's some add 10, take away 10. So that's for when we're looking at place value concepts. There's one that's just matching the color of the first 5 shapes. So there's a range of different overlays that we have there, and that's for gameplay mostly. We then have a pan balance. So all of the Numicon shapes are weighted. I haven't got my pan balance here, but if I, for example, had a 10 on one side of the pan balance and a 9 and a 1 on the other side, they would be balanced out. Okay, so it's a really important concept when we're looking at equivalence, those concepts of equivalence. We can put those Numicon shapes in the scales, in the pan balance, and they will balance out. Okay, so then if I was to put a 2, a 9 and a 2, well, obviously that would be too heavy, and the 10 would come up, and the 9 and the 2 would be heavier. So it's lovely that they're all weighted, because we can have a look at lots of equivalence concepts, and the Cuisenaire rods are also weighted as well. So we do lots with the pan balance. And there's also some software that's available through Oxford University Press as well to replicate these. All right, so I'm just going to quickly run you through the teacher resources and show you what they look like, and talk through what we do in the PD in terms of what books we cover. So starting off, we've got a Numicon in the nursery teaching guide. So we use this in most special education settings for those students working on the ABLES curriculum, C and D. And if we're looking at ABLES A and B, it covers most of the same concepts, but it has less. So ABLES A and B will be covering numbers, say, up to 3, where C will go up to 5, and then D will come to 10, that sort of thing. So it's just extending the number of things that you're working with. But we start with Numicon in the nursery. I'll show you what that looks like and the concepts in a minute. We also have the Firm Foundations Guide, and then we have Breaking Barriers. And the Breaking Barriers is the one that most of our schools with special needs students will be working with, because it has a really nice learning continuum that you can follow. It also has some assessment resources as well that you can follow. We then have Numicon Teacher Handbooks 1 to 6. And these teacher handbooks are focusing on classroom activities from really foundation to year 6. So if you wanted to supplement what you're doing with Breaking Barriers, you could supplement that with the teacher handbooks as well. So just to give you a look at where those books sort of sit. So pre-foundation, so those ABLES levels, we would have the Numicon in the nursery. And then we move into the Firm Foundations resource. And the Firm Foundations resource has beautiful activities that are linking to outside activities and play, lots of different daily routines, all that sort of stuff as well. We then have the Breaking Barriers resource that we can also use for students working at a foundation to sort of year 2, early year 3 level. And that I'll take you through that in a bit more detail, but that particular resource has lots of has a big focus on taking students through that learning continuum and making sure we have mastery of concepts before we move on. So they're the 3 that I'm going to quickly just show you now and what they look like. All right, so this is the First Steps with Numicon in the nursery book. It is focusing on, as I said, those early number understandings, informal learning. So it's not formalizing learning at this stage, but getting kids really engaged in early number concepts. So I've got my book here, and you won't be able to see what's here, but this is the content of it. So we've got here maths on the carpet, so a whole lot of activities around maths on the carpet. Then it will focus on, for example, maths in water play, messy play. So there's different chapters within the book that focus on these areas that you can see on the screen. Each of these pages that we work through have, tells you what you need to have ready. And it will be some Numicon resources, but will also be other things that you'll be using with your kids already. It gives you some really great questioning and effective questions to work through, and some extension activities. So the focus on this resource is to engage students in maths through these areas of play, sand play, outdoor play, small world play, tabletop play, snack time, etc. The key mathematical ideas within this resource: early counting concepts, finding how many, patterning, putting things in order, beginning calculating, and shape and space. Our next resource that we work through is the Firm Foundations book. So this is a bit bigger. And it comes with quite an extensive introductory teaching guide that takes you through what are kids learning at this particular stage of schooling, what are the key mathematical ideas we need to be considering, and then has some advice on daily routines and setting up your classroom space and everything like that. Now, this book is written for mainstream students and absolutely used effectively for special needs students, but there will be a couple of things such as mouthing, you know, if their kids are mouthing, that you would want to be adjusting for special needs students. We then have 18 activity cards. So we go through these in a bit more detail in our PD, but all of these activity cards introduce you to the educational context, talk very much about the mathematical language that you're exploring, and then take you through a range of activities, and then connecting activities that are outside or within art and design and those sort of things as well. So very graphic presentation of the activities, lots of promoting of questioning and really getting kids engaged. So the Firm Foundations Handbook covers these concepts of counting, getting to know the shapes and patterns, putting them in order, assigning number names, ordering the shapes and the numerals, moving beyond counting, cardinal number, place value, addition, subtraction, and reasoning about number. All right, so as I mentioned, they have activities related to, for example, daily routine. How do we put maths into daily routine? And one of the teachers I was working at in Canberra this year, she said her student was non-verbal, unable to move independently or touch or pick up things independently. And the biggest, the most obvious relationship that child had to numbers was when it was moved, when he was moved from one position to another. So for example, he was moved from, from his wheelchair to another situation. So it would be the 1, 2, 3 count. And that would be the daily routine where they would be counting. So it was a 1, 2, 3 lift procedure, and then they might extend that to a 1, 2, 3, 4 lift procedure. So even those sort of situations where you're counting with kids with daily practice. All right, so that's the Firm Foundations book. And then the third one that I wanted to show you is the Breaking Barriers resource. So this is the one that we have most of our schools working with students with special needs will use a combination of all these 3 resources depending on where your kids are at. But the Breaking Barriers one is great in that it takes you through those guided lessons for the big ideas in number especially. So where the Firm Foundations is starting to introduce generally all maths concepts at a foundation level, this one is moving you through up to early year 3 level, but still focusing on the big ideas in number, and covers these areas of counting, pattern and algebra, numbers of the number system, and calculating. It has an assessment signpost, so it has 47 different assessments that you can do individually with a child to determine where they're at and to inform your teaching. So it gives you, this is the first one, it gives you the task, so can the child match the Numicon shapes and use them to cover the baseboard? It tells you how you can find out and the activity you're going to do. If the child can do it, you move on to the next question, but if the child can't do it, it directs you to the pages in the book that you need to be working on. So say, for example, this one's saying, go to activity groups 1 and 2. And I'll come back to that page in a minute. So I can go directly to activity groups 1 and 2 in numbers and the number system, which is a yellow section. So I'll just go to that. And then it will be directing me to the activities on these pages in the book. All right. So it's an assessment that's directing you straight into the teaching. So it's not a pre-assessment you do to check where kids are at. You're assessing and teaching all the time. So those assessment activities can actually be merged in with your classroom activities to see where the kids are at and what they need, and then you can be teaching to those points of need. The other thing that this particular book has, and I'll just stop that share so you can see that a little more clearly. It has this scope and sequence. So the idea of the scope and sequence, I know you won't necessarily be able to read everything that's on there, but I'll just sort of talk you through it. So what we know is if we're working with students who are sort of at a pre-foundation coming into foundation level, we would be working with these particular concepts up here, and we're working with all these pattern and algebra, counting and numbers of the number system concepts in parallel. And you can see a grey line here, and we don't move past that grey line until kids have established all of those understandings. All right, so it's guiding us through that learning continuum. Once kids have developed understandings of these concepts, we can then move past that grey line. And this is showing us the learning continuum. So we've got a lot of schools that will actually use this resource to determine their teaching program, recognizing that the learning that comes over here has to come before the learning that's over here. So across those areas in pattern algebra, numbers of the number system, and calculating, we can be moving through those activities pretty much in order. So you've got a few different ways you can use this. You can be using the signpost assessment that I just showed you, where you're assessing with the signpost and then you're teaching to those areas. So these are the signposts, or you can be following the scope and sequence. So this is a really flexible resource to use. All right, now I'm conscious of time. I've got about another 5 more minutes. The activities in this are really easy to follow. And one of the things I love that we go through in our PD especially is these smaller steps, which are those prior learning. So if you've got kids that are not understanding this particular activity, it may be that we need to go back a little bit further, and there's some prior learning that hasn't been established. So it gives us activities that can be set up for that prior learning. And often in a special needs classroom, we would start with those smaller steps before we move into the main activities to make sure kids have established that prior learning. So lots of great examples for moving kids through these early number concepts. There's also a very comprehensive individual record of progress that actually covers like 27 pages, and then with all these concepts. So they're the small steps that kids are achieving. And we often know that our kids in special education settings will be achieving those milestones. It takes a longer time. So we want to see those smaller milestones that are embedded within those bigger concepts. So the record of progress allows us to do that, and also is a great resource for planning. And these are the areas that are within that record of progress. So we often have schools that will be taking that record of progress with the student every year. We've got a digital version as well, so that they can be tracking that progress year on year. And then as a new teacher comes in and works with that student, they can see exactly where those students are at across those 6 strands. All right, so a big focus on what we're doing as we're building up is seeing things like part, whole relationships, having very strong visual images of what that looks like. Once again, really supporting kids in working with those concrete materials. Things like teen numbers, we build up those Numicon shapes to show teen numbers with that focus on seeing 10 and some more. We can build up that tower, so that step that we had before, we can build that sequence up, but we also show it on the right as we're building up our place value understanding with 10s with 1s to the right. A big focus on kids having an understanding of the 10ness of things once they've moved past understanding the 5ness of things, building up that understanding of 10, and that then builds up pre-place value understanding as well. I'm going to stop there just to let you know, if you're on our website, we've got a range of free resources on our website that you can have a look at. There's also lots of material on Pinterest. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. We've pop research up here, and if we've been to schools and they've got ideas about how to use things, that will also be on there. I was at a school last couple of weeks ago, and we've got big Numicon shapes. So we've got these really big foam Numicon shapes where the 10 is about 1 meter high, and they're great for kids who don't have the ability to hold the smaller shapes. They can sort of hold on to the bigger shapes. But one of the teachers had this great idea where she had bought, I think it was a Christmas wrapping box to store all those in. So all those little things, we'll pop on our socials as well. So just before we finish up, it's a very fast overview of Numicon. I hope that's given you a bit of an idea about what it might look like in a special education setting. It's always hard to sort of sum it all up in 45 minutes. It's sort of a bit of a challenge, but yeah, I hope that gives you a bit of an overview so you can see how it works. And we've just gone through a few of the activities today, but obviously in our PD, the focus is on really getting teachers empowered to use the resources effectively and matching that to the needs of the kids that you're working with. Thanks. Have a great day. Bye-bye.